Hello. My name is Derek Coe, and welcome to the Secular Monastic, where we explore all things related to religion and spirituality, no supernatural beliefs required. And today we are talking about the four religious traditions and practices that I personally am going to argue are worth engaging in, even if you are an atheist. And this is a timely topic because the month of Ramadan just passed a couple of weeks ago. Happy belated Eid to all who celebrated. And also because we're now well into the season of Lent, which of course a lot of Christians are observing up until Easter Sunday. And to them I say, you're almost at the finish line. Good luck, you got this. A few disclaimers I want to get out of the way up front, as usual. First, this is certainly not a complete list, and not all religious traditions are going to be represented here. These are simply four religious traditions and practices that I have become the most familiar with and which have resonated with me the most in my 13 years as an atheist who has spent a great deal of time independently learning about and researching different world religions and their traditions and beliefs. However, I do hope that this video at least serves as a gateway for you to explore other religious rituals that might be better suited to your spiritual needs, even if these ones aren't appealing to you for any reason. Secondly, I am certainly not saying that atheists cannot invent rituals and traditions or even whole holidays of their own that are meaningful to themselves and their social circles. They certainly can, but it is just a bigger lift. It is going to require more work and more creativity. And if you can manage all that, it is just going to be harder to get others to participate in your own original ritual and tradition that you invented that might not have any historic basis and might not have any cultural relevance in society. The best example I can think of is the fact that my husband and I host a Christmas Eve party every year. And we invite all our friends who are in town for whatever reason or aren't going to spend their holiday with their birth families for whatever reason. And it's an awesome social event and celebration that I honestly look forward to a lot every year. And it's a great community building exercise, but there kind of is a reason, right, that I host a Christmas Eve party and not a party for, my own original holiday that I invented myself. Most of my friends and, most of the people I know have lived in the US for a very long time, or possibly even all their lives, and they are already deeply familiar with the traditions, the aesthetics, the music of Christmas in a way that they wouldn't be kind of familiar with any of that for when it comes to my, own original holiday that I may have invented that tries to, center family and community and, spreading a spirit of charity and cheer. And so it is just easier for me personally to go ahead and host a Christmas Eve party, invite folks to that, because if I were to invent my own holiday, I would probably get some weird looks from people and it would probably be harder to get people to attend my party. Still, more power to you if that's the route you want to take. And hopefully, hearing about existing traditions can help inspire you in your quest to create your own. So, with all that out of the way, let's jump right into it. Number one on the list is a tradition that comes from Buddhism, and it is called Maranasati, which is a term from the Pali language, which roughly translates to mindfulness of death, and others also translate it as death awareness. It points to a core tenet of Buddhism, anicca, or the impermanence of all things, and in this case, it implores Buddhist practitioners to remind themselves of the impermanence of their own life and their own body. In both major schools of Buddhism, that'll be Theravada and Mahayana, Maranasati also points to the practice of Buddhist death meditation, which takes various forms. Theravada and Mahayana Buddhists put slightly different emphases on the goals of this practice, which reflect the differences in doctrine and focus of each school of thought, but in a nutshell, Theravada Buddhists place greater emphasis on death meditation's ability to help one detach from one's own body and one's own life so that one can more easily attain enlightenment and achieve nirvana. While Mahayana Buddhists layer on top of this goal something I personally love, which is to remind practitioners of the urgency of taking the right actions and working intentionally for the liberation of all beings from suffering. And this reflects the primary difference in focus between Theravada and Mahayana Buddhist schools, with the former focused on becoming an arhat, or someone who has attained enlightenment, and the latter focused on becoming a bodhisattva, a being who attains enlightenment in order to work for the liberation of all sentient beings. Specific meditative practices include breathing exercises that many Westerners who take up mindfulness meditation will already be somewhat familiar with, but in this practice, one's focus is, yes, on one's breath, but with special emphasis placed on the contemplation of the fact that death can occur at any moment, and that every breath one draws can be their last. There's also charnel ground meditation, traditionally done by Buddhist monks and nuns in actual charnel grounds, traditional sites in Tibet and India, where corpses were just left in the open to decompose and even be consumed by various animals and insects. And while meditating next to actual decomposing bodies might not be feasible in the year of our Lord 2026, a version of this is still available to all people through the visualization of what in Buddhist tradition were the 9 stages of bodily decay. And fair warning, it gets a little bit more graphic, describing these stages. So if you're squeamish about that sort of thing, feel free to skip ahead. The first stage is a freshly dead but stiff and cooling body. The second stage is the state of bloating and swelling from gases in the body as it decays. The third is the rupturing of the skin due to the buildup of pressure from gases in the body from decomposition. The fourth is the leakage of fluids and blood from the body. The fifth is the putrefaction of soft tissues and the darkening and even liquefaction of the flesh. The sixth is the consumption of the body by birds, worms, insects, and other animals. The seventh is the dismemberment of the body as tendons and sinews disintegrate and limbs and other components separate. And the eighth is the complete reduction of the body's flesh so that there's only a dry skeleton remaining. And the ninth is the parching of bones and skeletal remains, which eventually break down and turn into dust in the soil. Now, if this all sounds a bit morbid, it is worth remembering the purpose of these meditations on death and bodily impermanence. Remember, part and parcel of Buddhism is the idea that all things are transient, including our lives, and these explicit reminders, which do not sugarcoat this reality, are meant to foster a sense of detachment from one's own ego and from one's own body. How often do we stress about the way our bodies look, the facial features we wish were different, the shape and color of our teeth, the weight we lose or that we put on, and other physical insecurities? This reminder of the impermanence of our bodies need not foster a sense that our physical bodies are entirely unimportant or that we should not look after our own health, but it can instead actually remind us of the frivolity of obsessing over our bodies even when they are perfectly functional and healthy. So you may obsess over your height, for example, if you are a shorter than average man, or the thickness of your thighs if you are a heavier than average woman, but thinking of the day when your body is cold and your limbs are stiff, or even when your body is starting to putrefy and rot away, can foster incredible gratitude for your body while helping you to identify with it less. Meditation on death is also meant to refocus our mind away from other superficial things we often feel deeply attached to and to refocus them on things that matter. Human insecurities abound regarding lack of wealth, traditional career success, education and prestige, and social approval from peers. And while it's certainly not that having any of these things is bad in and of themselves, practicing Maranasati helps to remind us that we can take none of these things to the grave, and ultimately forces us to think about how much these things will matter to us when we are on our deathbed. Contemplating death gives our living moments a sense of urgency, reminding us to pursue virtuous actions and charity, to treasure the lives of our loved ones while they are still with us, and appreciate what life has to offer while we are still alive. And one maybe a little silly example of this and how I practice it is the way that I talk to my dog sometimes, right? My dog is 9 years old. I'm very well aware of the fact that in the next 5 to 6 years, I will probably lose him. And I'm very open about that, and bring it up constantly. In fact, even sometimes when we have friends over and I'm like petting my dog or giving him a treat and looking at him in the eye and telling him how cute he is, I'll just casually drop in the next sentence that, like, oh, I know you're going to die one day and it's going to make me really sad. And my friends give me a weird look when I do this. But if you really think about it, it is enormously beneficial to my relationship to my dog when I remind myself that my time with him is finite. It enhances every moment that I spend with him. I'm reminded of the fact that I'm not going to be able to feel his fluffy head under my hand as I pet him anymore. And even when he does behaviors that are honestly quite annoying to me sometimes, so for example, he'll compulsively lick me sometimes, and he'll even lick my clothing until it's sopping wet and kind of gross. And, this is obviously a little bit annoying when it's unwelcome. But even in those moments, if I'm reminded of the fact that, his stinky dog tongue is going to rot away one day, and one day I will not even have him around to annoy me, that obviously and just honestly enhances every moment that I spend with him. So, Maranasati in practice and, providing a very, very real and tangible benefit to my life. All right, moving on. Number two, Christian Lent, which is also known in Catholic, Orthodox, and some Protestant denominations as the Lenten fast. And while specific start dates and end dates of the Lent season differ between denominations and different Christian traditions, emphasize different practices, the principles that unite various Christian churches in the shared understanding of the purpose of Lent are expounded in the three pillars of Lent. The first pillar is prayer, which emphasizes justice towards God. The second is fasting, which emphasizes justice towards self. And the third is almsgiving or charity, which emphasizes justice towards neighbors. Now, this is immediately a bit of a conundrum to us atheists because Pillar 1 immediately feels as if it will not apply to us. Justice towards God is not something that we believe in because we just do not believe in a God. This is where it might be tempting for us to throw Pillar 1 out entirely in our secular Lenten observance and emphasize only the latter two pillars. But I will argue that there is a baby in the bathwater worth salvaging even in Pillar 1. And to illustrate how, I am going to quote the late writer and professor David Foster Wallace, who famously said, quote, "Here's something else that's weird but true. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism. There is no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship." And the compelling reason for maybe choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship, be it JC or Allah, be it Yahweh or the Wiccan Mother Goddess, or the Four Noble Truths, or some inviolable set of ethical principles, is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, if they are where you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough, never feel you have enough. It's the truth. Worship your body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before they finally grieve you. On one level, we all know this stuff already. It's been codified as myths, proverbs, cliches, epigrams, parables, the skeleton of every great story. The whole trick is keeping the truth up front in daily consciousness. End quote. It is almost a cliche in atheist spaces now that people do not need religion or God to have purpose and meaning in their lives, but I sometimes worry that many atheists have filled the void of what they worship with the kinds of things that Wallace warns against worshiping. If not money specifically or material things, then travel, pleasure, social approval, and career success. I would argue that a version of this exists in the standard American dream that is sold to many of us in the US from a young age, and which is still kind of the main aspiration of a lot of people, secular and religious. The idea that, your happiness lies in purchasing a home, having a family, and dedicating all of our focus to our own property, our own children, our life partner, and our other birth family. And just to be clear, I am not saying that there is anything wrong with buying a home or pouring your time and energy into your family. Those can be worthwhile goals and a legitimate part of living out your purpose on this earth. However, you may lose your home in a disaster. Your spouse may pass away one day long before you do. Your parents will almost certainly die before you do, and your children will grow up, live independent lives, and perhaps even move far away from you as they often do. In most tragic cases, in some of the most tragic cases, you may even need to bury your own children. My challenge to fellow atheists is to imagine a day in which your loved ones have passed, you do not have the health to travel, and things like sex and other bodily pleasures are no longer as accessible to you. Do you still have an animating force in your life and principles to live by and a purpose to serve? And if you do, let that be the God that you worship. For me, that animating principle looks something like seeking truth in order to be clear-eyed on how to reduce as much harm done to others as possible. And the Lenten pillar describing duty towards God looks something like taking seriously these principles I practice by challenging and re-examining my beliefs, updating my knowledge, letting go of old and inaccurate ways of thinking, and acting based on my learnings by donating my money, engaging in activism, and changing my lifestyle and behavior. This year, I have learned a great deal about, of all things, credit cards, rewards points, and I have learned that credit card companies primarily make money by charging merchants transaction fees, which are passed on to all consumers, including the poorest consumers, in the form of higher prices, all to benefit wealthier people who hold premium credit cards in the form of travel points and other rewards. And I have actually downgraded my premium credit card as of a month ago, partly due to everything that I have learned. Now, it would be easy for me to say, I already do so much. I'm already vegan. I already prevent so much harm to sentient creatures and the environment compared to the average person. I show up and vote for the right people every couple years. Let me have this, let me have my credit cards points. I'm good enough. And yet I continuously learn new things and reflect on how my behavior contributes to broken systems, just because I'm a masochist, but because for me, this lifelong commitment to learning more and always progressing towards doing more good and less harm is what I worship. And this has replaced the lifelong commitment I used to have towards the Christian God and towards living a life that was more free of sin, in the way that my old church defined it. And just to knock myself off my high horse for just a little bit, there's a great deal I also get out of these principles I hold as sacred, just as Christians get a great deal out of believing in God and avoiding what they see as sin and getting closer to alignment to what they see as God's moral standards, and God's virtues. The ethic I worship makes life feel less empty and devoid of structure and purpose in a chaotic and often really cruel world. It brings me the comfort of being part of something greater and part of something good. My challenge to my fellow atheists is to find something worth worshiping, even if you cannot find someone that you can believe in who is worth worshiping. And let that be your pillar one. All right, moving on. I promise the next two pillars will be quicker. I just had a lot to say about pillar one. Pillar two of Lent is fasting, which signifies justice to yourself. And this is one that needs less of an introduction because secular people are already at least somewhat familiar with the principles behind pillar two, in the form of annual New Year's resolutions that we tend to make at the end of December and often quickly stop trying to stick to by the end of February. Now, it should be said that traditionally Christians have fasted from certain luxuries, including sugary foods, alcohol, meat, dairy, and eggs, and even pleasures like sex in accordance with Pillar 2 of Lent. This would often be taken so seriously that birth records from hundreds of years ago showed that births often dropped precipitously in the 9 months after the season of Lent. Traditionally, there are also meanings attached to fasting that relate to Jesus and commemorate his 40 days of fasting and temptation in the desert. And, these are themes that might not vibe with us atheists quite as well. But again, there is a baby in the bathwater here. Pillar 2 has traditionally been about physical discipline and purification in preparation for Easter, breaking sinful habits that harm spiritual health and even mental and physical health. It has involved abstaining from pleasures in order to engage in and focus on self examination and spiritual reflection. And who among us has not tried to commit to healthier habits like eating less sugar, drinking less, and spending less time on social media? Who among us wouldn't like to be more disciplined in our lives and strengthen our ability to break bad habits, whether that is eating too many potato chips, spending too many hours every night playing video games, or even biting our nails? How many of us want to trade bad habits for good ones, like making time to read, exercise, and meditate regularly? You don't need to think of any of these habits that obstruct your flourishing as sinful anymore to understand that they are harmful and should be changed. This year, in accordance with my commitment to Pillar 2, I am abstaining from posting on Twitter and trying to abstain from all marijuana products until Easter Sunday because I believe the former will free up my time and mind for more productive activities, and that both will allow me to be more clear minded and present with the people that I love. And I would recommend not overcommitting here, quality over quantity, but pick a couple things you would like to do less of or consume less of for your own self improvement and give it a go. Personally speaking, just giving up two things for Lent this year. I've been able to stay off of Twitter pretty much. Yeah, no, I've stayed off of Twitter since Lent began, but I have fallen off the horse, unfortunately, a few times when it comes to marijuana usage. But that's okay. I have still cut down quite a bit on my usage, and it's like Lent is as much about trying to commit to these things as, continuously trying to get back on the horse once you've been kicked off it. So, yeah, worth looking into and worth like implementing in your own life. Pillar 3 of Lent, the final pillar, is almsgiving or charity under the principle of justice towards others. I practice this every year because my birthday is at the end of March and tends to coincide with the Lent season. And I always match $329 in donations to a charity of my choice through an online birthday fundraiser that I usually share and post about a week before my birthday. This year, in the midst of higher fuel prices due to the Iran war, I matched donations to Give Directly, a charity that provides unconditional cash transfers to impoverished families in developing countries, which will almost certainly face catastrophic economic conditions without help. What might just be a dollar or two more a gallon or a liter more at the pump for Americans and citizens of other developed countries can be the difference between eating and not eating for many of the worst off in our global community. And because the global economic impacts of this war are likely to be dire, I highly, highly recommend that you find an organization this spring to donate to, especially since charitable giving tends to spike during December, during the holiday season, and in the months after. Organizations often struggle for funding and are looking for additional donations or even recurring monthly donations throughout the year, if that is something that you can commit to. And despite my background as a former Christian with religious trauma, I love the Christian tradition of Lent and I endeavor to observe it because I think it is just genuinely good for everyone to do these things, to, reflect on what they serve and worship and reflect on how to do that better, to think of ways to improve their own lives by shedding bad habits and adopting better ones, to think of others and to take action to meaningfully help those outside of our immediate social circles and families. The three pillars of Lent are kind of a perfect roadmap for guiding you in doing these things. And, if you can't manage it throughout the entire year, you can do so for at least around 6 weeks out of the year. Number three, moving on to number three on the list, not, we're past pillar 3. of Lent. Number 3 on the list of traditions worth observing and participating in, even if you're an atheist, is something I've touched upon previously in my first video on the 7 things humans lose when they lose religion, and that is the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur, traditionally commemorated as the Day of Atonement. This holiday has its roots in the ancient Jewish tradition in which the high priest of Israel performed ritual animal sacrifices and entered the Holy of Holies in the inner sanctum of the Temple of Jerusalem and sought atonement for the entire nation and people of Israel. But since the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70, it has been molded by the diaspora and by rabbinic tradition and adapted to modern times. It comes with a 25-hour fast, and it is a solemn day focused on the themes of Fidyah, sorry if I'm butchering the Hebrew there, Fidyah, or confession of sin and wrongdoing, and Teshuvah, or repentance and reconciliation, not only between individuals and God, but between individuals and those that they have wronged. Like I've said in a previous video, it's not a fun holiday. Jews do not wish each other a happy Yom Kippur, like some well-meaning Gentiles sometimes do, but in its best form, it is a day of spiritual reflection, moral development, and reconciliation between members of the community. I think oftentimes as secular people, we understand on some theoretical level that we are not perfect in the way we treat other people, and we get irritable. We snap at our romantic partners, and our children, and even our friends. And we say things in the heat of the moment that hurt others, and we are often really bad at managing our own anger. Oftentimes, when we have really let someone that we care about down, and that leads to rupture in our relationship with them, we think about our actions and we regret them. But in my experience, it is rare for us in the secular world to voluntarily reach out and own up to our misdeeds and try to repair the damage we may have done to others and the relationships that we have had with them. We probably understand that we should periodically self-reflect on our harmful behaviors and patterns, think about strategies for reducing them, and recommit to living more ethically. But what we lack is ritual and tradition that confronts us with our responsibilities to do these things, allowing us to always push them back to some hypothetical future day or time that may never come. What Yom Kippur does is ritualize the project of introspection and reconciliation with others, putting it front and center at a designated time every year so that hopefully even those within the community who try their best to avoid reflecting on their words and actions and owning up to those that have hurt others are confronted with their responsibility to do so at least once a year. It probably doesn't hurt that for theistic and religious Jews that there is also belief in a God watching over your activities on that day, and who will seal your name in the book of life for the upcoming year if you practice confession, reconciliation, almsgiving, and repentance adequately in the days between Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur, a 10-day period known as the High Holy Days in Judaism. However, I do not think that you need to be a religious Jew or even Jewish at all to take to heart Yom Kippur's themes of confession, repentance, charity, and reconciliation. I have many secular and atheist Jewish friends who do not necessarily believe in a literal God that is watching over their actions during the High Holy Days, and they also don't believe that he is literally sealing their names in the book of life, but they nonetheless take their responsibilities during this holiday very seriously. And similarly, you do not need to be Jewish to get value out of observing Yom Kippur and using it as a day of reflection, repentance, reconciliation, and recommitment to your ethical principles. I think these are all things that are a little too lacking in our modern secular world, and I think we can all benefit greatly by building more structured traditions into our modern secular lives that place these themes front and center. And the fourth and final tradition on this list is are the Islamic practices of Fidyah and Kaffarah, what I like to very simplistically summarize as indulgences done right. And just to give a brief world history or European history Review lesson: indulgences were a practice of the Catholic Church in which Christians could make payments to the church in order to receive absolution for sins. Initially, more of these funds were funneled to charitable institutions founded by the church, like public hospitals and orphanages, but over time, corruption led to abuses in which funds from indulgences were used by clergy for personal expenses and pleasures, and the Vatican also eventually used them to build large gilded churches at great expense, including the St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican today. Fidyah and Kaffarah, on the other hand, preserve the idea that by doing genuine charitable acts, you can do penance for violations of religious obligations, and both are forms of penance for breaking or violating religious obligations that take the form of directly assisting the needy and often by feeding the poor and hungry, but they are different tiers of penance for different levels of severity in the violation of religious obligations. Fidyah is typically charity as penance for a religious obligation that one cannot meet due to physical limitations and is typically practiced in the context of Ramadan in place of physically fasting. So if one is very elderly or chronically ill or otherwise unable to safely fast, feeding a poor person 2 meals for each missed day of fasting is an option for fulfilling your obligations during Ramadan, if you have the means to do so. Kaffarah, on the other hand, is for more serious violations of religious obligations that are committed without a valid excuse. Examples include breaking a fast during Ramadan without a valid reason, especially if you are young and healthy. Other examples include having sexual intercourse during daytime during Ramadan. And outside the context of Ramadan, it can also serve as penance for breaking an oath or doing prohibited acts like cutting hair or, again, having sex during a Hajj pilgrimage. Kaffarah also carries with it more costly obligations because it is seen as penance for religious violations that are not justified. Examples include providing 60 meals to the poor for each missed day of fasting during Ramadan rather than the 2 traditionally required to fulfill fidyah. Historically, other ways of compensating for such intentionally unexcused violations of religious obligations also include freeing a believing, that is, a Muslim slave. And yes, we can do the typical atheist thing of looking down on the fact that non-Muslim slaves are not traditionally given the same consideration, or on the fact that Islam even prescribed slavery as every culture and every religion in the ancient world did. But in the context of its time, this demonstrates how costly and serious kaffarah was as a form of penance for a religious violation. I love the practice of fidyah because it comes with the recognition in Islam that humans do not live in perfect conditions or perfect bodies required for fulfilling spiritual obligations, and it offers differently abled people a way to practice their spiritual devotion. More than that, fidyah understands that one's obligations should be commensurate with one's privilege, as impoverished people who could not safely or healthfully fast were often exempted not just from fasting during Ramadan, but also from paying fidyah. I also love the practice of kaffarah because it recognizes that penance should at least be somewhat proportional to the severity of a violation that you commit, and it gives people a way to fulfill their religious duties and make up for inevitable mistakes and missteps on one's spiritual path, all while helping the most vulnerable in society. Modern secular forms that these practices can take can include donating to legitimate conservation and climate change mitigation charities and organizations when you take a long haul flight for vacation, or do another behavior that is very carbon intensive, and comes with a lot of carbon emissions. And I do include legitimate as a caveat here because unfortunately the market for things like carbon credits in the US is a bit of a mess and not nearly tightly regulated enough. I don't have time to go down that rabbit hole here, but it is something worth researching if you want to kind of like offset your climate impacts. To explore another example, I know vegan friends and even vegan sympathetic friends who understand the vegan argument and are intellectually honest with themselves about the grotesque amount of animal suffering that their purchase of meat, dairy, and eggs funds and contributes to. And still, even vegan friends of mine, committed vegans, when they travel, specifically to more remote places with fewer options, need to occasionally eat a meal with eggs and dairy in order to get adequate nutrition for a small period of time. But when they violate this high ethical standard they've set for themselves, they give to an animal charity or sanctuary or to foundations that try to research more efficient methods for making lab grown meat. I know friends who are not vegan who nonetheless try to limit their meat consumption to weekends and still attempt to repair the damage they do by violating their own stated standards of being anti-cruelty and, loving animals as sentient creatures that deserve our moral consideration. And often they do this by donating to many of the same charities and foundations. And I'll just end by saying that I think it is good both to set very high ethical standards for your own behavior and to be deeply mindful of your place in the world and your impact on it as you move through life. Um, but nobody is perfect, right? Fidyah and Kaffarah demonstrate that you do not need to attain perfection in order to take your obligations to your own values and principles seriously. Accidents happen and mistakes happen. It feels good to nobody when we violate our own personal codes, but there are ways we can try to repair or compensate for the damage our mistakes do that are proportional to our means and proportional to the magnitude of our mistakes. If you are a secular person who has left religion, or even a religious person who has stepped away from your church or your mosque or your temple, in order to pursue a spiritual path more fulfilling to you, you may still miss and see value in traditions and rituals of your old religious communities and institutions that give structure and meaning to your life. And I am here to tell you, as an atheist of 13 years, that it is possible to reincorporate those things into your life, and that this can be an incredibly fulfilling endeavor. And the nice thing about no longer practicing a specific religious tradition is we secular atheists who want to reinvent spirituality and spiritual practice for ourselves can pick and choose the best traditions from every religion based on their merits without privileging one or the other based on cultural conditioning. If these existing traditions don't resonate with you, find ones that do. Modify these traditions so that they more authentically fit into your spiritual practice. So often we talk about what we lose when we lose religion and belief, but it is also worth talking about something gained. And what we secular but spiritual people gain is freedom, not to endlessly indulge our egos, but to create new systems of values and new traditions and practices that reinforce those values and give structure to our lives and that feel authentic to us. So, on that rare positive note, that will be all for today. Thank you for tuning in and listening. I will see you next time. Bye.